Hey guys, this is Jed, KC1KQZ, and I'm just going to share the results we had of the survey that I did for my homework for one of my statistics classes, which involved ham radio users. I'll get rid of my mug here. The first question we asked was, what describes you? This was a attempt to get some licensing demographic stuff, and as many of you responded, I missed the advanced license, which turned out to be about 6% when we did a subsequent survey. I don't think it affected our results much, but it did leave some people feeling left out. That was unintentional. What we saw next was age distribution. As you see here, most people sort of build around that 55 to 64 age group, and that's kind of typical of what we see with other groups of amateur radio operators. So again, no surprises there. We asked about education, and again, a similar sort of distribution. A big chunk there between the associate degree, bachelor degree, and some college, sort of making up the majority of the population, with some shoulders on either end for advanced degrees and for less degrees. Overwhelmingly male, 98% or so male. There was a question in there, an attempt to be more inclusive about third gender or non-binary. One or two people chose that. There were about 4 answers for the fill in your own gender. None of those seemed to be actual gender identities. That was mostly people being disruptive. Looking at income, is it interesting that there's this little divot here that things come down and then bounce back up? That may be because the household income was the question. So if most people are around 50 to 60,000, you would see a hump here of unmarried people or people answering for their own income. And then you notice that this section would be twice that. So people that are in that area and talking about a dual income family would pop up there, and that would account for this gap in here. I'm not sure if that marches out or not. It's not really the focus of the survey, but it was an interesting little thing noticed in that graph. Part of the assignment was to get continuous data, not just discrete data. That's a sort of just a research thing. And so this question did that by letting people choose the percentage of which they spend their time doing either HF or VHF, UHF, and you see that kind of broke down like that, about 37% of the time doing HF and about half the time doing VHF or UHF. So here I didn't really like the way the data presented. I'm using it as software for the first time that compiles all this. We got 900 or so responses, and so that all has to be compiled by software. And I didn't really like the way this came out image-wise or being able to understand it. What you see here is these are the answers, the choices that people were able to give for different types of activity. And then the different activities you see in different colors there. So obviously, people are going to choose not at all for things they don't do. So you see a lot of responses there, but that doesn't mean people aren't doing things, just these are the things they're not doing. So what you see here is repeater use was sort of the lowest of anybody's response for not at all, and it was the highest of people's a great deal. So what we see here is that people do repeaters a lot. That people are using digital modes a lot. You can see these two spikes throughout the sort of this upper half. So a lot of digital and a lot of repeater use. I was a little surprised by the digital. Maybe I just wasn't aware of how much that was happening, or it could be because we're selecting people by Facebook. So people who found the survey found it through Facebook, and so that would obviously affect our sampling group. We have more people who are accustomed to computers. Obviously, the hermit up in the woods or out on some remote spit in Iceland who doesn't use a computer is not going to be part of the survey. So that may be sampling, or that may be just more than what I expected. Asked how many handhelds people own, and you see that there's a good sort of bell curve distribution. I'm not sure why 7 or more, although I don't know why. There's some speculative thoughts, but and then again, we see that same bump there as from the bell curve. It may be that people were just not interested in these questions and were taking the last response. And again, we see that with mobile transceivers as well. So here's where we really crunch down things. This is where I think it gets interesting. 73% of respondents have owned a Baofeng. And then they said, and then when I asked those people, so if you answered yes to owning a Baofeng, right, then you were asked how likely you were to purchase another. And so of this 73%, 23% said extremely likely, 22% said moderately likely, and so on as we go here, right? So this gray chunk here, we're going to come back to, but that's kind of big when we see it compared to some other brands. And those are people who answered they were extremely unlikely to purchase another radio. For Kenwood, you see how that gray chunk is much smaller now. 55%, which is fewer, people said that they've owned a Kenwood. But 35% were extremely likely and 29% were moderately likely to purchase another Kenwood. When we asked about Yaesu, we saw huge ownership, 72%, with huge loyalty, 51% extremely likely and 29% moderately likely to purchase another. And you can see now we're just down to slivers here with the dissatisfied users. And similar with ICOM. So let's look at those all together. What you see here is a large amount of ownership with Baofeng, and then a much smaller extremely likely and a much bigger extremely unlikely than what we see with the other brands. And you may interpret from this that Yaesu and ICOM are sort of neck and neck as far as popularity and customer loyalty. That may or may not be the case. I didn't ask if they were satisfied with their radio. I asked if they were likely to purchase another one. It may be that Baofeng users have already purchased 20 and are not likely to buy another one. It may be there's a lot of ways to account for that in the way people answer questions. So it's hard to you got to be careful not to leap to any conclusions here. Although I did find it pretty interesting. Again, when you look at that gray sliver here between the Yaesu and the ICOM and Kenwood owners as compared to Baofeng. Just in full disclosure, I'm a Baofeng user myself. I own a couple. I probably would have put myself in the neither likely or unlikely to purchase another, but that's because I already have 3 and I'm satisfied with them for what they do, which would be a different answer than if you asked me if it was better than my Yaesu or if I had to choose one, which one I would take. So surveys can be misleading like that. It all depends on how you want to interpret the information. Okay, so here's one where the graph did not come out the way I liked it. How important is being familiar with the brand when purchasing a radio? So that question was asked, and then the choices were very important down to not important at all, right? So that is graphed here. The problem is, because I put them in the order I did, the answer of very important came out to be 1 point, and not important at all came out to be 5 points. So as people go, so this would be the very important and not important at all. So this curve is kind of upside down from what I would have liked it to be, because this is less important here. So the 25 to 34 age group is much less, puts much less importance on the brand name. And then we see it trending as being more important, until we get to here. Once we leave this at 75 and above, we have these 2 data points that show it being much less important again. I don't think that means anything about 80-year-old ham users because it's a very small group of people here. So now we're talking about people who are 80 years old or so, over 75, who picked up this survey on Facebook and who completed it. May not represent all of the 80-year-old hams as far as their familiarity with technology, their willingness to try things new, some of that. So there's a lot that can go into this answer. And once you get into small numbers like this, you see how quickly it can throw off data points. I think basically this curve showing that younger people were less interested, older people were more interested. The under 18s also were more interested with brand. And that may be a function of the experience that they have in the hobby. This is kind of a tough one to follow, but the survey asked you to rank the overall importance of these different things when you buy a new radio. So the choices you see down here were brand name, price, and again, more important is lower. because of the way I wrote the question, which now I know for next time. And so less important is up here. So you see that size and weight was really unimportant. And when we asked everybody which activities they enjoy, we saw that soda and Poto were pretty low too. So it makes sense that this group would not be particularly concerned about size and weight of their radio, as much as the biggest concern here was the green line, which is the bands and mode capability, obviously, like the function of the radio. And that makes sense. Price was more important here with the younger folks. Run's less important than function until we get here again. And again, that 85 or older. I think 85 or older was one respondent. So not necessarily indicative of the generation as a whole. Features became more important as people got older. Here, the blue line. And transmitting power stayed flat. Price became less important, except for this one fellow over here. And then this was interesting because I combined a couple questions to get this data. How much money would you spend on your next radio? And then broke it down by how likely are you to purchase a radio in the next year. This is one that I think would be significant to a retailer or to a manufacturer when you're looking at demographics and who is looking to spend money, how much money are they looking to spend. So if you look at this extremely likely group, and the yellow to green is going to be this $200 to $800 range, right? So when you add together the green, yellow, and orange into this extremely likely and moderately likely, you see that there's a lot of dollars looking to enter the marketplace in the next year. So this would tell you this may be an interesting group to get yourselves in front of, or to move your advertising or something like that. Again, this survey wasn't really set up properly. Like I literally threw this together the night before. And so it isn't the same as you would do if you're doing a deep market analysis. This was just a quick homework assignment, but it is interesting to see those patterns emerge from that group. And so that was the gist of what we had here. I really appreciate you guys. If you're still listening, why are you still listening? It's over. Go home. Really appreciate you guys, all your cooperation and all that with the survey. And 73.